Good evening and welcome to the Kansas Legislature. I'm your host, Becky Kaiser, and I am joined by a great panel here this evening. We're so excited to have some new visitors with us. We'll be having them introduce themselves in just a moment. We are, of course, live from downtown Bunker Hill, and I, again, Becky Kaiser, am your host. I am a reporter for the Hays Post Eagle Radio News in Hays, Kansas, and I'm also a fellow with the Fort Hays State University Docking Institute of Public Affairs. And again, a reminder that you are part of this program as well, so we're hopeful that you'll give us a call tonight, whether you have a comment or a question. We have lots of knowledge on the panel tonight and lots of things that we could talk about. Again, that toll-free number will be 1-800-337-4788. First of all, I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves, a little bit about who they are and what they have been working on, and we'll talk about what's coming up. Of course, it sounds like we might be going into a special session, but we'll find out about that. So let's start to my far left.
Well, thank you, Becky. So Elaine Bowers, I am the senator for Senate District 36 in Kansas, which after the election this year will grow one more county, so 14 counties. Will tie with the other District 40, which also has 14 counties. So you think 28 counties have 105. Senate District 36 is one of those big chunks of Kansas. And I'm in my third term in the Senate, and a car dealer from Concordia, is a business owner, and serve on 4 committees in the Senate. I do enjoy transportation, local government, where I'm vice chair with Carolyn, chair transparency and ethics, judiciary, and utility. So I have a busy schedule during the day, and I like constituent service, solving problems with us in rural Kansas. That's really what makes me tick.
Wonderful. Also join us, closest to me to my left is Senator Brenda Dietrich, who is from, Carolyn, of course. I'm reading off the wrong list. Sorry, Carolyn. Who is from Sedgwick and District 31. And we're talking about this great panel. We finally have some representation from outside of the area, a little bit bigger area of Kansas, the South Central area. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Yeah, I'm from the South Central Kansas area, and my husband and I farm corn, soybeans, and wheat, and we're looking to get into some agritourism because our heart is all about telling the story of agriculture. I do represent the 31st District. I'm ending my 5th term with a retirement. And looking forward to that as well, even though I feel that I have been very blessed all these years to meet so many great people across the state and learn so much about what's important to the people from the state of Kansas. I chair local government right now, and I'm vice chair with the Transparency Committee that Elaine chairs. And I also serve on Ag and Natural Resources and the Ways and Means Committee, and I've had the opportunity to serve on the Ways and Means Committee for 16 years. And so I always tell people that's our Bible for the state of Kansas, and so that's why, to me, it's so very important.
All righty. And to my immediate right, a very familiar face here on the Kansas Legislature, Troy Waymaster, who of course is from Bunker Hill. Tell us about yourself, Troy.
I've just been here a few times. But Troy Waymaster, State Representative for the 109th Kansas House District from Bunker Hill. So this is my hometown. I represent now, with the redistricting, 5 counties in central and north central Kansas of Ellsworth, Russell, Lincoln, Osborne, and Smith. So that's my new district, all entire counties. So it makes it a lot easier when people are trying to find out who their representative is. This is my 8th session of being the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, which is the budget committee, as Senator McGinn was talking about with Senate Ways and Means. In fact, we were just talking earlier about when I first stepped into that role, she was the chair of Ways and Means, and she taught me a great deal.
Yes,
she was a very good mentor.
Yes.
In regards to negotiations and how to maneuver through the budget. So that's the only committee that I serve on during the legislative session. But during the off session, I also serve on the State Finance Council, which is actually House and Senate leadership that is actually led by the governor. And we talk about financial matters outside of the legislative session. I also serve on the Build Kansas committee, and that is a committee that we can talk about later. For our local communities to try to draw down more federal dollars in regards to an array of different projects that might be going on. And then actually at the end of this month, I do have a meeting in Topeka because by statute, I serve on the Residents Advisory Committee, and we actually put into Senate Bill 28, which was the mega budget bill, a discussion on making some changes to Cedar Crest, which is the governor's residence. And we can talk about that as well as far as the ideas that we have discussing expanding Cedar Crest.
Ah, interesting. All right. And then finally, to my very far right, this is the real Brenda Dietrich here. And we are delighted to have her. She is from District 20, which is Topeka, and great representation finally to have somebody from Eastern Kansas. And we'll talk maybe a little bit about the comparisons between Eastern and Western Kansas. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Senator.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Becky. So I represent primarily Southwest Topeka, but due to redistricting, I now have all of Obenza County. So that will be kind of an interesting piece to what I normally do, because I'm the former superintendent of the Auburn-Washburn School District. So I was an educator for 40 years. And so I ran for the House, and I served with Troy in the House in 2017. So for 4 years, 2 terms. And then I ran for the Senate, and I'm actually Elaine's office mate. And I've been in the Senate now for 4 years into my first term. So I serve on committees, transportation, financial institutions, and insurance, and I've actually kind of been on that for 8 years because in the House, similar committee. And then I'm vice chair of commerce, which is a fascinating committee. We do a lot of interesting things. And then I have my 4th committee is Senate Education. And so again, you know, that's a very important part of our state budget, and it's very important to all of our communities to have a strong public education system. So I'm very involved in that. And we have many other things that we're involved in when we're not in session, which I think we may be coming back to session.
Yeah.
So
That's what I hear. That's one of the things we want to talk about. Well, let's start with, we have a budget, but we don't have a tax bill, correct?
Correct.
That's the way to put it. And Troy, the last time that you were here, you and I were here together, we talked about what the difference is between those. I think sometimes, including myself, it gets a little confusing about how those two come together and that they are in fact separate. You're talking about something that exists, but you have to fund it. So let's talk about why it hasn't been funded yet, why there may be a special session.
Well, the reason why there's going to be a special session is because the governor has said that the tax plan that we passed at the latter part of session is too expensive. And it's not theoretically the tax plan that she wanted. Actually, Senator Dietrich and I were just going over a possible proposal, which I said is the same tax plan that she introduced in January. The legislature obviously wanted to do more. And and Chairman Smith, who is the chair of the tax committee on the House, he and I have been talking about this for 2 years. And I've always said you can't go over $500 million a year. I mean, that's the threshold. And actually, and you compare that to the governor's plan, it's really not that far off. Especially when you also contemplate all the things that she had in her budget that we took out as far as big spending items. So you take the tax plan out, 2036 is the House bill number that it was in. And in fiscal year 2028, without no tax plan, we still have a $1.9 billion ending balance. And we also still have the $1.8 billion in the rainy day fund. So it's sustainable, but obviously it's not a tax plan that the governor likes. She's afraid and concerned about going back to the years that all of us kind of remember in the 2010s. And she doesn't want to go back to that. And she basically said yesterday that she was going to veto the bill and call a special session
So
until there's a tax plan. And she goes, and I will continue to call a special session until I get a tax plan that I will sign.
So do we have a date for this?
They're working on it.
Yeah, they're working on
polling
it.
us now, so
Whatever works.
looking like early June.
Oh,
The
okay.
first 2
So-
weeks of June, possibly.
And 2 weeks. It's not
into-
something that you're going to do in a day.
Well,
Or within 2 weeks, and I don't think it's a day program, unless you all believe different. I
Which-
think
and
several
I think
days.
they want to get it done before people who have to run for election. You don't want to push up to that August date, so. And it needs to be done before, I mean, it would be helpful to be done before July 1,
Yeah.
because that's when our year starts again.
Exactly. So I guess a question that I have is, you already said this, Troy, that the governor is basically saying it's just still too expensive. Obviously, the legislators do not agree with that.
And this was a bipartisan bill. I mean, you had Republicans and Democrats by overwhelming numbers in both chambers. In fact, I think the Senate was 25 to 9.
And you were
Mostly in
unanimous
the
in the
House.
House on one bill.
On one bill, we were
Unanimous.
unanimous. And I've never seen that on
On
a tax bill.
Really?
In all my years in the legislature, I've never seen we've actually had 2 unanimous votes on a tax bill. in the House.
Incredible.
Here's the frustration. We voted for a 3-tier plan. We voted for 1 tier. We voted for 2 tier. We voted for several different tiers, several tax plans, and we're down to really talking about pocket change at the end of the day. And back to looking at the long term, I actually was the one that started asking for a 5-year lookout as to what our revenues would look like when I was the budget chair. And that's just really, I was looking at it because we were dealing with education at the time, trying to figure out, will it work? But here's the problem with looking at a 5-year. One, your legislators change, so they have different philosophies about things. But also the reason why we're elected, if in year 3 things are starting to look bad, then we make changes. So, before that, we used to just look at a 2 to 3 year out period, I think it was. And so now she's looking at the 5-year out period that never was a tradition. It was more of just a planning thing. It's not something that we can't change as we see our economy changing and things like that. But
Well, and as you're kind of alluding to, so when COVID-19 hit, I mean, that 5-year plan went out the window because we didn't know
Right.
what to expect.
Sure.
I mean, we were, thinking we were going to be in dire straits with regards to the budget and our ending surplus, and ended up actually kind of being the opposite. But you can have something, an anomaly that comes in within that 5 years and could change everything.
Well, the other thing about these tax plans, every one that we voted on has similar components. So when you say pocket change, that's a great way to describe what's left, because it's just very minor tweaks now, I think, that the governor's looking at. So it's going to be, it's philosophical probably between a 2-tier and a 3-tier versus a 1-tier. But when you dig into all of the different pieces of those tax plans, they're just not that different. So I don't know.
Is there a plan of attack? Maybe I shouldn't use
Maybe
the
that
word
would
attack,
be
but
that might be a leadership question.
Yes. We're being pulled. There are very popular items in each one of these packages. No state income tax on Social Security. It's a big deal. That is one that everyone would agree on 100%. Removing sales tax on food to July 1st and not January 1st. That's in every package as well. And lowering property taxes on our 20 mills, which will become 19.5. That's very popular, that people want to lower our property taxes. So that's another good piece in there. So we all agree on what's really good in there. It's just the income tax brackets is the sticky wicket in this case.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, stay tuned.
We'll know soon enough, I think.
And maybe we'll be back.
We'll find out. We'll find out. Brenda, we talked just for a moment about education, and probably most people understand that that is a huge part of the budget that you work on every year, and so important. How do you feel things went this year, and are we funding? We've talked about this before in previous shows about equitable funding and regulations and laws that had come into place where Kansas had to follow those. As far as I can tell, we've done a pretty good job. Do you feel good about it?
I do feel very good about it. We did have a couple of hiccups earlier in session, but by the time we got to the end of session, the Senate bill, or I guess it's the House substitute for Senate Bill 387, is our education funding bill. And that did fully fund education or public schools per the Gannon requirement. Now that's going to sunset in 2017, or 2027, sorry. Make myself nervous. 2027. And so we have to start thinking about the formula and what it's going to look like at that point 3 years from now. So there are some pieces of this school finance bill that fully funds education, adds more dollars to special education, about $74 million, and then has a few other pieces that, again, you have to think about as you go forward thinking about the Gannon suit and when that is going to expire. So there is going to be an education task force piece to that. It's a policy piece that will be probably enacted sometime next session. And there's a process for how you choose who's going to be a part of that as you begin to look at equity issues and what's changed. You know, our rural districts are looking different than even our urban and suburban districts. So we've got at-risk funding that we have to take a look at. We have a new blueprint for literacy, which is a separate bill, but it's directly related to teaching reading, using the science of reading, and we have to fund that. We have to look at longitudinally what that looks like. Are our kids being successful? So there's just, you know, the school finance formula is complicated. And you served on that 2017 committee. And it is hard, and it's hard to explain to people, because mostly what our communities want to know is that their children are receiving a quality education, that we're funding that education, and that it's being funded, you use the word equitably, across all districts, and that we're providing for kids with special needs. And our foster kids, they automatically now can be qualified for at-risk funding, which is additional supports. So I think we're doing a good job. You've got children in school. Your wife's
Yeah,
one, just one.
The other two are not yet. but,
Yes.
yeah,
So, I mean, I do feel like we have done what we needed to do with school finance. Now we have to just be able to look at the results and make sure that we're getting a return on investment.
And remind us, how big of a chunk is that of the total budget?
52%.
It's
About,
60.
well, if you add
Oh,
higher ed, it's
If you add higher ed.
62%.
Yeah, it's over
Yeah.
60%.
Okay.
But if
K
it's
through 12 is about.
51, 52.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a good portion, a little bit of, about the majority just about,
Right.
if not a little bit over.
But
which
you know,
might
I
be
think
there.
state government is responsible for everything public. Public safety, public education, public health. You might disagree because you guys have to do the budgets. But I just think that's the infrastructure, public infrastructure, our roads and highways. So, so I think it's, you know, dollars well spent. If our communities tell us that they think that we're spending their dollars wisely.
We talk about, and I say those areas, which makes me think about a little bit about if there, and I know that you all know each other and work well together, but is there any antipathy, any knocking of heads between rural, urban, suburban legislators in Kansas? Sometimes we hear some really strange stories.
I would probably say those strange stories are somewhat true. I don't know, you have, it's a conundrum sometimes under the dome. I know Elaine has said this many times. A lot of the times it's urban against rural. It's not really Republican against Democrat. It's rural versus urban. But then you also take our two biggest urban sectors, and sometimes it's Wichita against Johnson County. I mean, sometimes they don't see eye to eye on certain items. So it depends what the issue is. And it's interesting who aligns with others, and then on the next issue they defect and they go to a different sector, and it's interesting to watch, but it's by issue by issue.
Chairman Waymaster, I would say that would have been my definition 20 years ago. Particularly, that's when I found out that it is Johnson County against Wichita schools. Johnson County has a little different structure. Wichita has different structure as well. But I think we have done a lot of things to help the rural schools as well. I mean, trying to change how you count kids and some things like that. But as Senator Dietrich mentioned, it's not an issue that's going to go away with our rural areas. We see that every time we go redistrict every 10 years, that populations, you know, my area gained, their populations decreased. And then you have to ask the question, you know, we want our schools to voluntarily figure out this is what's best if they want to consolidate. We don't want to force consolidation. And the last thing we want to do is have a child that has to be on a bus for over an hour one way. So I think those are things I feel like that I have always been sympathetic about for rural schools and trying to figure that out. Because no matter where you live in Kansas, I think you deserve the opportunity to have public education. So, but I don't feel like we fight as much now about that as we
I don't
are
know. I
realizing.
have some Johnson County reps. that
Okay, yeah,
They make some comments that I'm just kind of,
you're,
I mean, they would say, you know, if you have a student population of less than 250, you need to close all the schools. I mean, that's,
Not
and then they
sensible.
will say,
Yeah.
and then they'll make the comment, they're like, well, I'm tired of our money in Johnson County going out to help these rural schools.
and I heard that 20 years ago, I did hear that.
It's still there. It still resonates.
Let's see, we send food.
We send people.
Yeah, we send people too. That's right. And the perfect example is in the budget with the soccer, that World Cup coming
yes,
to
yes.
Kansas, of the big
That was a
ask.
balancing act.
Yes, a big ask for the urban eastern coast of Kansas versus us out here in rural Kansas, and how Troy worked with, well, if it's good here, we can do something similar here to help our economy. So we do it in the budgeting as well. So it's fairness and as representing our districts and our people of what's important to us, our quality of life.
Yes. Well, tell us a little bit about that, Troy.
The World Cup.
What's going to happen in western Kansas?
Well, and as Senator Bowers was alluding to, early on in the session, actually before session even began, they were talking about the World Cup, which is coming to the Kansas City metro area and other cities around it in 2026, and they're wanting.
And that's a
basically-
done deal, right?
It's a done
has-
deal.
Okay, that's going to happen.
But the state of Missouri had stepped in and gave $50 million because the final quarterfinal match is going to be held at Arrowhead, and so they do a lot of renovations to Arrowhead, which is that's another topic we can talk about later. Anyway, so then they were asking for the state of Kansas for an investment as well, and now granted, I mean, this is over a month-long, soccer tournament. It's going to bring people from all over the world into our area of the state, but it's still a very hard sell when you're asking for nearly $30 million to be invested in one area of the state and nowhere else. And so, just by chance, actually, somebody had contacted me about some developments in northwest Kansas. And actually, it was out of Hayes. And they're looking for a retail development. And I was like, well, I really don't know if I can just do one community. And he goes, well, actually, there's about 8 communities that we've been talking to. So we had Atwood, Hayes, Phillipsburg, I mean, all these communities in northwest Kansas. And then also the Dane G. Hansen Foundation came in with a request as well. And I said, okay, so this is something we can package together. So what we need to do now is we have northwest, we have northeast, I need south central, and I need southwest and southeast. And so then I was meeting with members, and I was like, okay, what is something that we can do in southwest? Well, with Hillmar Cheese coming in with all the dairies, they're having a lot of transportation demands. And so we dedicated money from the State Highway Fund to try to expedite those demands for when they come online. South Central, there's been this development we were talking about earlier in regards to the partnership between KU and WSU, Wichita State University, in regards to the biomedical facilities. So we were going to give them additional funds from the American Rescue Plan Act money. And then in southeast Kansas, we were looking at doing a bonding authority for the KBI because there was this partnership with Pittsburgh State University and also with the KBI, FBI, other federal partners. And so we put this together as an entire package. And we said, okay, Northeast Kansas, if you want the World Cup money, you have to accept all this in the state. It just can't be you. Everybody else is going to benefit some way. And it passed and signed by the governor, and so now it's law. And with the I don't want to say the beauty of it,
It's
but
negotiated and it's
it was negotiated, but it's no
Beneficial.
state taxpayer money. It was all existing funds that we have either with the American Rescue Plan Act money, or it was, we used money that we already dedicated a couple years ago in regards to the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation. So we pulled some of that money back because there were housing needs in northwest Kansas that we dedicated those funds to. And actually, that was a suggestion by the governor when I met with her about this project. That was her suggestion on using those funds. And then the State Highway Fund. So no state general fund dollars went towards this project. It was all existing funds that we had to utilize in a quick time frame. And so, like I said, that was the package, and everybody came on board, because I was like, I can't give $30 million to Northeast Kansas and nothing comes back to my area of the state as far as the needs that needs to be addressed.
You must feel pretty good about that. That's a win-win statewide.
It was, I mean, I worked with a lot of my budget chairs and appropriations members in the House on what the needs were. And I said the only way that we could actually sell this is if the entire state benefits. We can't leave a section out. And so that's why we had to partner with all these different areas and say, okay, what is your need? And we will find a way to get it there for you.
And before time gets away from us, since we have a retiring legislator with years of experience, I would like to know what you are most proud of having been a part of over all these years. You talked about, you know, how much it's meant to you and the things that you've learned. What legislation or project did you work on that you feel best about?
Well, there's quite a few things, and you know I got to narrow it down to just a few things. But I was a county commissioner before I became a senator, and at that time it was the second 10-year transportation plan that we did and supported as a commissioner, and saw how it worked at our local level. And then I had the opportunity to vote for the next one, and then finally the last one we did, I had the opportunity to chair it and help put that package together, which is now benefiting. I know people hate orange cones across the state, but I look at them differently now. I used to not like them either, and now I see it as it's progress in our communities, that helping our infrastructure so that people would want to travel here or travel through here, that type of thing. And so, you know, when you don't see the orange barrels, that's when we didn't have any money. And now we have that money, and I think one of the provisions you passed as well is more money for our airports to do some infrastructure work as well. In addition to that, is tied in with that as well, has to do with some provisions to allow passenger rail. And so, as you may know, that we're working hard for the Heartland Flyer to be able to connect from Newton clear down to Oklahoma City. That'll open that whole 35 corridor up and will improve our economy immensely. And so it's just interesting just to have the opportunity to work on figuring out how to put that together. How many communities, whether they're rural or urban, that it impacted. And then I can't let it stand without me sharing. I served as a social service chairman since 2008, I believe, and that's a pretty tough thing to learn about. And after we went through the recession and then a tax plan, and we're finally climbing out, it's been great to see the fact that we've been able to improve services for those people that are most in need in the state of Kansas. And so we're not putting Band-Aids on things now. We're actually trying to improve those services to help families get through their daily lives and that type of thing. So I've been blessed in both those areas, but in a number of areas as well.
Conversely, is there an area that you feel like didn't get finished or you didn't like the outcome?
You know, I'm coming to grips with that, and it's been kind of fun towards the end of session when I'd either carry bills or talk about something, and I tell people that, you know, this is a great bill, and I'll just go ahead and interject this one bill because it's a rural issue. We passed an EMS bill, and it has to do with trying to get, because there's not a lot of people that have the certification to be in the ambulance, and so we passed a bill that provides for the driver to have CPR training, and then you have an EMS person in the back, and it goes from facility to facility. So it may go to a hospital to a nursing home to a nursing home, those types of things. And what that did is free up those other folks that are EMS certified to go to somebody's home if they're having a heart attack or there's a car wreck. So I think that was some great legislation that Senator Bowers and I worked on as well. But So anyway, I just, that is, so when people would say, oh, you know, it needs this change or that change, and I said, you know what, it's going to get enacted July 1, and you're going to be back here in, you know, January 6th or 7th, and guess what? If there's a problem, you can fix it. So I don't feel that attachment. I feel like I trust the system well enough and the people of Kansas that they're going to talk to their representatives about, we need change.
Well, that makes me want to ask those of you who are not retiring and plan on running for re-election, we want to talk about, well, two things. First of all, I know that you've not been on vacation since you've been out of Topeka, and you probably are going back, as you have discovered. What do you do with your time, Elaine, when you're not there and you know that you'll be going back? I know you and, well, you all do, spend a lot of time with constituents and listening to their concerns.
This, and I still work full-time in my car dealerships,
Yes,
too.
of
So
course.
I go to work every day, and my husband will ask me, are you car woman or are you legislator? And I say, well, it's a percentage, and it's 50-50, 80-20, but I never tell him which. So every day I do legislative work, so it's very important. And constituent service is actually solving problems. And we don't necessarily have to pass a new law to solve a problem. We need to get that person to the right agency, to the right person, so that they're heard and that problem is solved. But then along the way, if we see, yeah, this isn't working like we think it should, and like Carolyn mentioned, we might have to come back and tweak something, that it isn't working exactly like we had hoped and anticipated. That's what we do. We keep our ears open. And we do go, all of us here at this table, everywhere we're asked to go. If we have a speech or a meeting people would like us to be at, we go above and beyond to get there. That's what we feel our job is out here, and particularly rural Kansas. And you can't go to a grocery store where we live, and even Brenda too. I'm with Brenda in Topeka. She can't go anywhere without someone knowing her. So we're stopped constantly about situations and what's happening. I might bring up a sales tax bill, an exemption of, just an idea someone had at home, but starting July 1st, we won't be charged sales tax on the processing our food. So not just meat, but people were asking me, why are we paying full sales tax at my meat processor? And I'd say, well, you're paying for the service, the sales tax on the service of cutting up that meat. So like you think haircuts or accounting or lawyers, we don't pay sales tax on that service. So that's one that people were asking me at home, why am I paying full sales tax? I said, well, there's two different things here, but you actually have an excellent idea. So we fixed that in one of the bills that we overrode a veto. So starting July 1st, when our farmers and ranchers take our critters into the processing plant, there's no sales tax on that process. And at the same time, lowering to our local rate of sales tax on food even. So it's really a win for rural Kansas when it comes to what our consumers are paying out of pocket. So ideas come to us like this, just from people talking to us when we're at home.
How about, Brenda, have you had something that's come up from a constituent that you never had thought about and realized, hey, this is an idea that we could take and run with and would help some people?
Absolutely. One of the things I was going to mention is that when we're not in session, because I'm in Topeka, so I'm one of those Topeka legislators that I will go to the Capitol whenever you need me to be at the Capitol. So yesterday I was with 70 fifth graders, showing them how government works.
Wonderful.
So, and I really enjoy that, and I still serve on boards and things in Topeka. So.
Were they excited?
Oh,
Were they
yes.
still interested?
Oh my gosh, yes, and they got to sit, we took them into the house because there were 70 of them. So we let them sit in representative seats, and so, yeah, and they all live in Topeka themselves, of course, it's a Topeka school. And it was really it's fascinating. They have great questions. And as a matter of fact, in the House, not to get too off topic here, but it's interesting how children look at what we do. So the voting boxes that you have on your house desks, the buttons, they're like, but what if you're colorblind? Because it's red for yes, or no, and green for yes, and then you have your name up there on the screen, and if you vote yes, it's green, if you vote no, it's red. What if you're colorblind? What do you do? And it's like, nobody has ever asked me that before.
Oh my gosh,
I'm not
what a
sure
great
what you do, but
question.
anyway. So things that have come up, absolutely. So I know there are many projects that people are working on in our communities. And tax exemptions are always an issue, as Elaine just talked about, Senator Bowers talked about. So we have projects that for nonprofits that make no sense. Some get tax exemptions because they're a nonprofit, others do not. Nursing homes, just like the
Different Rotary
exploration
clubs
place,
even, yes.
Rotary clubs, Boy Scouts. It's just a kind of a plethora of who decided you get a tax exemption, but I don't, but we both have nonprofits. So those kinds of things are what I work on quite a bit, trying to bring some equity to why is that? And tax exemptions, we probably have $6 billion worth of tax exemptions in
gosh.
Kansas.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to continue that. But there's no structure to it. And I wish, and I know this is probably a pipe dream, but I wish at some point in time we'd be able to put some guardrails on why you would get a tax exemption and why you would not be qualified for one. And I know it's been talked about over the years. So I would love to see some progress made on that. So it seems fair. You know, your Girl Scout troop gets one, but my Boy Scout troop doesn't. Why? That kind of thing.
That would be a lot of work.
It would be a lot.
But
of
it
work.
would be, that
And
would
I'm
be-
not a tax chair.
And the simple answer, someone new to come to the legislature, have a hearing, and get it
Ask for
ran
it.
through and
let's
passed
talk
as a
about-
bill.
Let's talk about the Curtis House. That came
Yes.
from the community and the Liberty Bell. I know you've talked about that before. But you know, we have people who've lived in our communities who see the value to Charles Curtis, his house. He was a vice president. It's in
Yes.
Topeka. It's near the Capitol. State Historical Society would like to purchase it, but it's going to take probably more dollars than we would be willing to provide as a state. But we need to do something to help them to be able to do that, to preserve that history. So that was something that, thank goodness, we were able to add into our budget. Thank you.
You're welcome. Although in caucus, I did have to talk about that. And they're like, well, why are we buying the Charles Curtis house?
Well,
I was like, well, think about it this way. He's the only Kansan
Yes.
that has ever served as vice president of the United States.
A native
And
Indian.
he was also
Yes.
of Native Indian descent.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a pretty,
He's got pictures of himself giving awards, you know, to Amelia Earhart. I mean, he's just got great connections.
well, and
And
the
it's a
other
beautiful
thing-
house.
And on like, you know, a connection point for me was, I guess, all in his house, because some people intruded, and it was like, you wouldn't believe the pictures he had with Bob Dole.
Oh, Bob Dole, that's right, that's
It was
right.
all throughout that house.
And it's well maintained, it's really in excellent condition. So that is not probably the full price of the house that we have in our budget. So the
Not half.
Historical Society will have to do the fundraising, but at least we've given them the opportunity to do that.
Interesting. That would be wonderful. Well, speaking of history, Brenda, I'm going to come back to you because I can't say this word. I had to look it up and I still can't say it.
Ready?
There is an anniversary coming up for the United States, 250 years, and the formal word is
Semi-quincentennial.
semi-quincentennial.
Quincentennial. It's the 250th birthday of our
Anniversary,
nation.
yeah.
And Senator Bowers and I serve on that commission. And what we're trying to do, and we meet monthly, Representative Estes is the chair, Susan Estes, is to find ways in our state that we can encourage our communities to, you know, celebrate this 250th. So we had a booth at the state fair this summer. So, and we'll be back again, and we've got the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I don't know how many other organizations involved in helping us find ways to celebrate. And
I certainly remember the bicentennial
Oh, sure.
celebration. So if we can make it big like that, but think 250 years, that's a long
you
time.
know, parades, dedications, just celebrations throughout each community, each county.
Sure, it'd be a lot that you could do, fun. And I want to remind you that also, prior to the show, you have the opportunity to send in questions by email, and we do have one. And I'm just going to read the question, and then whoever wants to take it, and hopefully we'll have a couple comments here. The question that was emailed to us is, why does the legislature have the notion that they can do nothing for CAPERS recipients? Searches of past actions show there have been COLAs, cost of living adjustments, and other adjustments made. Increasing the death benefit does nothing for the living. Inflation is literally eating our breakfast, lunch, and supper and dinner. But the legislature itself, the governor, and all state employees benefited from the great fiscal actions of the 2024 legislative session. You did get a pay raise, didn't you? Or you're going to get a pay raise. So I think that's probably what they're, one of the things.
The commission set up the pay raise.
Right.
I'll
right.
talk about both of those.
Okay.
First off, on capers, it's a predetermined benefit. And when you go into it, it says this is exactly what you are going to get when you get out of it. And in the 80s, they played with the cap, they gave COLAs, and we went underwater. And then we took in all the teachers as well. And so now we're just trying to get ourselves back to being whole, and we are on that journey, and we are getting there. It's better than I've ever seen ever. But you can go play in a 401k if you want, or you can take a predetermined benefit. And if you don't think you're going to have enough money by the time you retire, then you need to be investing in other savings accounts and things like that as well. So you know what you're getting when you go in. And yes, we did pass the death benefit. That was a request of a constituent of mine as well. And it was just to kind of, they hadn't had an increase for over 30 years, and it was to just make some adjustments for that benefit as well. And I'll talk about the pay increase and hope they don't beat on me.
Well, let's see.
Because I'm not going to be there.
Right.
So, you know, I have, ever since I went to the legislature, I had hoped that we would do something about the pay so that more people would participate in the process. And then as I'd been there for 12, 16 years, you know, what I was noticing, and we're starting to see younger folks get in there, but the problem is, when I first went in, we have farmers, lawyers, doctors, we have all these people who are professionals. So I had the ability, my husband worked at Textron, I had the ability to go to Topeka and make $88.66 per day times 90 days. So even when Elaine talked about constituent services, those don't stop when we're out of session. Those go on year round. And so we need to have the ability for the millennials and the younger age group to be able to make some kind of a living wage, because you cannot just say to your boss, hey, can I take off from January to May? And then I'll work the rest of the time. There's not very many jobs that give you that opportunity.
No.
And so maybe this salary was a little bit too high, and I think some people thought that, but the way they did the process to run it through, it just wasn't amendable or even have much discussion on the floor. But a pay increase is important and very needed in the state of Kansas. State of Kansas is one of the lowest 5 states across the nation in paying their legislators. And so if we want the rest of our community, whether they're younger, they're lower income or whatever, to participate in this process, then we need to pay them a living wage. And so, you know, again, I'm glad it's moving forward. Was it too high? You know, we'll find out, but was it needed? Absolutely, it was needed.
Brenda, do you think some of the 5th graders that you visited with are interested?
Maybe.
By the time
More
they're
than their
18.
allowance, yeah. I will, if I can, circle back to the capers thing. So
Sure.
I've been on the joint committee for capers and our investments and benefits for probably 8 years now, and we know that there's an issue with Tier 3, which is the capers level that if you were hired after 2015 into any government job that's supported by capers, you would be on Tier 3. And we know that the return that folks are seeing in Tier 3 probably isn't even something that you would find beneficial until you're about 15 years out. And so a lot of folks now don't stay in the same job for 15 years. And so we do know that Tier 3 could be something that we need to reevaluate, adjust, get some solutions on perhaps to make it more enticing for somebody new to come to work for the state, or even for teachers, because the teachers' school group is really a large part of capers right now. So the COLA has just been a difficult pill for a lot of people to swallow because it's a defined benefit and because it's so expensive. It's about $300 million, I think, to give a COLA adjustment, even just $100 on your capers benefit. And that is just a tremendous amount of money. And so it's difficult. It's difficult to get 165 legislators agree to do that, and the governor to sign off on it. So,
And I agree, I hope we can fix, I hope you guys
Tier
can
3.
fix Tier 3. Because we're not able to keep the people that get in, they may get out, get offered another job in 5 years because it's just not worth it to keep it. So, you guys need to fix that.
And part of the discussion is it wasn't like a normal legislative process with a bill in the House or the Senate and then it's tweaked along the way. It was a special committee set up, brought us this idea that said, if you don't run it, it becomes law. And so it was the way it happened, the transparency. And I've heard it could have been stair-stepped in, it was a large amount all of a sudden. So those are a lot of the issues that we've had, that we didn't get to actually vote for it or against it. We just made procedural votes. So that's a lot of the discussion of how it happened. And the panel was made up of really smart people, business people, retired legislators, retired agency heads. So really well-rounded that thought this out with many different meetings too. So not to take away from the work that they did, but how it came to us legislators is very foreign to us. So a vote, not voting for it is, it becomes law. So that's a very different way of passing legislation that we'd like to have a little more control over this.
Troy, were you going to say something else about capers? You looked like
I
you
wasn't
were
going
gonna
to say
jump in.
anything about capers, but in regards to the legislative pay, I mean, Carolyn was exactly right. When I entered into the legislature and decided to run in 2012, I was working as a manager of a banking facility in Russell. And the bank was headquartered out of Kansas City, and they would not let me run. And so I would say, luckily, my dad and my uncle had a farming operation, and they were needing more help. And so I was able to run for the legislature and then work for my father and my uncle. But had that not been there, I couldn't. Because you can't. I mean, if you're younger and you have a family and you're just buying a home, $88.66 a day is not going to pay your mortgage.
no. Or childcare.
Or
if you have
childcare.
children.
I mean, it's just not going to do it. And then we talk about our jobs, and I think Elaine and Carolyn both mentioned, and Brenda too, it doesn't end when we have sine die. I mean, I have been on the phone with constituents ever since we left on April 30th, and even during the time that we're there. I have been asked to go to Wichita, to Salina. I've been asked to travel the country, trying to bring business into the state of Kansas with the Department of Commerce. All that, I mean, it doesn't come free. I mean, you have to, there's expenses out there. And I think a lot of individuals don't understand that it's a full-time job. I always say it was a full-time job with part-time pay.
And we don't have assistants after we leave either.
And we don't have
No
assistants after we
clerical
leave. We're
help.
interns
We
or
are
any
on our
staff. We're
own.
on our
No
own.
staff, that's right.
No
We're
staff.
not Congress.
No.
And
Right.
that's where people need to differentiate. Yeah.
We don't have offices
Right.
that are out in our hometowns. I mean, you can, I guess, but
Well, I get to run up, but
yeah, you do. That's right. You're right there, so you can go back to your office. But I don't have an office that's set up in my district. I mean, everything is mainly everything's ran out of our farm shop. I take a lot of the things when I go work at our farm, and if I have some downtime, then I pull up emails and then try to answer constituents.
I know, I've contacted you there before, that you've answered the phone. I can tell you're in the shop.
So that's where I do it, because I have to balance those two
Sure.
jobs.
You know, and it makes me think too, we're talking about the age of people and bringing in younger people, and that was one of the things that was talked about. It was trying to make it more palatable for the younger people. But I also think diversity in the jobs and careers of people,
Yes.
because if you're, you know, if you make enough money and you have the kind of job that you can be gone for a while, but if you can't, then we just don't have that variety of people. And I would think the more variety of jobs that people do who are part of the legislature, the more representation, the better representation and understanding there is of Kansans, because we're a mixed group.
I might also add, I think when you have some diversity in occupations, when we have bills that come before us, we can turn to that individual who's got the banking experience or owns a car dealership, who has a farm, to help us understand, why is this bill important, and am I missing something? Can you help me understand it? And I'll give you an example. In the Senate, we have nobody in law enforcement, not one person. And so I think that's kind of one of those things. As we get more and more bills that come before us that deal with public safety, it sure would be nice to have someone who can speak to us about how that impacts their daily work. So just an example, because I was just
Well, I would say, and for an example, like last legislative session in 2023, before I went back to session, I was on a sprayer, driving around in fields and doing our farm work, but thinking about how can we help out housing in rural areas of the state through the banking industry. And I crafted 4 bills by sitting on the sprayer thinking about my expertise in banking, and they all passed. And so now, hopefully, we're able to help with the construction of homes in rural areas of the state, because the state of Kansas actually changed some of the parameters in regards to lender financing, or where, it makes it easier for rural areas of the state to try to get housing. But because I had the knowledge in banking, and, I was working on the farm, I was able to.
And you have tractors that can drive by themselves now.
That's true. I mean, it was on GPS, but I had
thinking time.
thinking time.
It's, the younger generation does bring different ideas to us as well. So we have 2 30-year-olds in the Senate. And in fact, one of our friends just had a baby just a few days ago. So the youngest woman in the Senate, and a baby girl in their family. But they talk about child care of the group that we're out of. Troy's in it though, but bringing different ideas of a problem that they're seeing with their generation. So the different ages bring different things as well. So we do appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, we have about 3 minutes left in the show, but I wanted to quickly ask each one of you, you've been through this 2-year process, and to talk about, and Elaine, let's just start with you. What, again, kind of what we've already talked to Carolyn about, is what have you been most proud about with this session, and what do you think, if reelected, that you need to work on again?
Well, and lucky me getting to go first. So, anything local government, I really do listen to what our local government folks are telling us. I think I'd love to continue in that role, sadly without Carolyn by my side, but I really in tune to them. Still, again, what are our problems at home, constituent service, what we can do. There's so many different ideas that come to us that really aren't ours, so listening for those still. I do still love capital preservation, because our capital is the #1 tourist site, so continuing to bring people to the Capitol, and just like in get in, Father Capon's memorial, which will be a statue, is now going to be on the 2nd floor outside of the governor's office and the secretary of, lieutenant governor's office, that area. And the mural for the women's suffrage for voting will be on the 1st floor in front of the cage elevator. Those are important things to continue, that we bring people to our buildings to see the work that we do.
Wonderful. Troy, how about you? What are you thinking worked well this session, and what didn't?
Well, I think, obviously, I'm very involved with the budget. And so I think there were some items that the governor vetoed that I agreed with her. There were some items that I didn't necessarily agree with her on. But we'll have next year, if I'm reelected, to go back and try to address those issues. I would say one of the biggest feathers in my cap is what we talked about earlier in regards to that entire package deal that we had for the entire state of Kansas, where not just Northeast Kansas and the Kansas City area was going to benefit, but everybody in the state. And this has been going on for a few years, and it's just kind of, this is what happens when you're in the legislature and you kind of think outside the box, and you are able to travel to other states and see what they're doing, like we were talking about childcare. And since all 3 of my sons have been a part of this program, making the Dolly Parton Imagination Library program a statewide program, and spearheading that and working with all the partners, and that has been, it seems minor, but the impact that it's had for kids across the state of Kansas from the ages of 0 to 5 is massive. And I mean, had people from southeast Kansas, southwest, everywhere in the state thanking me because now their kid is receiving a free book every month from Dolly Parton.
It's a great program.
And
Brenda, can you have a
Well, just a
one
couple
thing?
things, you know, working, living in Topeka and Shawnee County and Wabunsee County, I think just working with economic development kinds of things and getting new businesses to come in and locate, and ribbon cutting sound like such a simple thing, but that means a new business. We have a new business, and so the more of those that I go to, the better it is. But working with our airport to try and do some work out at Forbes Field to prepare ourselves for what Wichita and Salina is looking at, the MROs and maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities, so that's all good. Certainly anything we do with education is a positive. How we count kids is an amendment to a bill that Elaine carried this year to help rural and declining districts be able to fund their enrollment as they decline. I think over the next couple of years, I think that was a very positive thing. So I like the work we do in the legislature. I like being of help and assistance and being able to provide, whatever our communities need to make sure that they're providing a quality of life that as a Kansan, fourth generation Kansan, we can all be proud of.
Well, thank you all for joining
thank
us
you.
this evening, and thank you for your service. We very much appreciate it across the state. I'm so glad to have all of you with us. Thank you for joining us on the Kansas Legislature this evening. I'm Becky Kaiser. Good night.